Hey everybody, I'm Nathaniel Dodson from tutvid.com, and today we're going to create this watercolor effect using the YouTube logo, but really you can use any shape or graphic or image or anything you like. We're going to have a lot of fun creating our own custom watercolor pattern first, and then applying it and creating the exploding shape in Photoshop. It's a whole bunch of fun. Now, if you do enjoy this tutorial, make sure you slap the subscribe button so you can follow along, check out all the Photoshop tutorials on this channel, and never miss another Photoshop tutorial, graphic design video, you name it, in the future. Let's jump into this tutorial right here and right now. All right, so first and foremost, here in Photoshop, let's go File, New, and create a new document, and we're going to size this guy 2560 by 1440. That's just what I'm going to use, and I'm going to set my resolution here to 72. You can really choose any size you want, but if you're following along and you want to do exactly what I'm doing, just follow along with the size as well. We're going to hit the Create button here. We have a brand new document. Now, I have a bunch of links down in the description to the video where you can download free brushes, color inspiration. In fact, I'm going to bring up my Google Chrome window, and I'll have a link to this Awash in Color Unsplash collection. And there's just all these brightly colored photos. We're going to draw on these for inspiration for our watercolor pattern. I think this guy right here, this colored wall, will probably be what we work with. If not that image, I'll end up going with a brightly colored image. Something like this over here where there's just tons of color is great. You can scroll down a little bit further. And really all you're looking for is just images that have a lot of brightness and have a lot of color. Just go through and find an image that you like, something that has a ton of color and brightness and contrast and everything good like that. And we'll use, you can really use any photo you like. In addition to these colorful photos, we have a vintage concrete texture that you'll want to download. We'll be using that. That's pretty important. It's free. There's a link for it down there. And then a bunch of, two different watercolor brush packs, and then a powder, a dust, and a disintegration brush. And then also, since we're going to be using the YouTube icon, you can download an SVG file, which is a scalable vector graphic, and drag this into Photoshop. And this is a great website, World Vector Logo. They have all kinds of different logos vectored up that you can grab and use for all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to go with the good old YouTube play button. We'll use that in Photoshop. But first of all, to start things off, first of all, let's create our watercolor pattern. So we have a bunch of photos here. I downloaded a bunch of different color photos. Here's this one from Unsplash. I think I'm actually going to go with this one. This is also an Unsplash photo. I'm not sure if it's in that color group that I sent along. This actually would be a really nice one as well. But let's go with this one here with kind of the colored dust. I'm going to drag it into my Photoshop document. And if you're using an image that is of the portrait orientation persuasion, all you'll do when you drag it in is you'll just rotate it around so it's going side to side like this. And then I'm just going to stretch this guy out on both sides. So it moves a little beyond the edges of my image, and also stretch the top up, and I'll stretch the bottom down a little bit, something like that, just so we have some good overlap. Then I'll hit the little check icon to commit it. I don't care if it's, out of whack and stretched and twisted. That's all going to be totally fine. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here in this tutorial, consider supporting the channel by picking up a copy of my Photoshop course. There's a link that'll appear up there in the top corner. It's a little circle with the letter I in it, or there's a link down in the description to this video as well. Either link works. It's the best way to support this channel, and this channel is supported and funded entirely by viewers just like you. So if you pick up a copy of the course, thank you so much. But let's not let that deviate and distract us from the matter at hand. Let's get back to this video. We're going to go ahead now and come up here to Filter, go Blur. We're going to go Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to go with like, I don't know, 100 maybe, depending on the detail of the photo. You want to go anywhere from 1 to 200 pixels of Gaussian blur. You just want to make sure that all the detail in the image is gone. Let me actually knock this down to like 75. No, I think I'll roll with 100. Let me just go with 100. I'm going to hit OK, and you can see how we now just almost immediately have this randomized pattern of color. Now, what I'll do here is I'm just going to hold down my Alt-Option key and double-click the background layer and drag it down to the garbage just to get it out of the way. And we're going to begin creating the watercolor texture itself. So we will, let's create a new layer actually first. Create a new layer, and we'll name this watercolor. There we go. And I'm going to go Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill this layer with, there you go, 50% gray as our contents. Hit OK. You can see there, 50% gray. That's great. And now we're going to set this layer to the blend mode of overlay. What that's going to do is it's going to knock away all that 50% gray, but now we can begin adding some texture to this color. And we're going to do it using the dodge and burn tool. So I'm going to begin with the burn tool, and I'm going to work in the midtones range, and an exposure of 35% is going to work beautifully for us. All right, I'm going to right click here. It's going to bring up my brush context menu. I'm going to move over here to this little cog wheel flyout menu, and I'm going to choose to replace the brushes. Replace brushes. And I'll open up here and find the folder where you've saved all of your brushes. And I'm going to go with one of my 2 watercolor brush packs. Maybe I'll go with the free watercolor brushes 3 pack first. I'll just double click on that. It's going to load it into Photoshop. And you can see here I've got this medley of brushes. So I'll just grab the first one here, and they're huge. They're 2,500 pixels, and our document's only 1440 tall. So maybe I'll knock this down to like 1600, so it's still just a little bit bigger than my document. And I'm just going to click once. And you can see that clicking once, I don't know if you can see that, but we've actually begun adding some texture. So I'll just click another time, maybe 1, 2, 3 times there. But you can see how we have that really harsh line. So that's just something we're going to have to keep in mind here using these square brushes. I'm going to right click. I'm going to use a different brush here. Maybe I'll just size this one down to like 2,000. Whoop, not 200. I'm going to go 2,000. There we go. And I'll just paint with this one a couple times. I'll just begin building in some texture. I'll right click again. I'll choose another brush. I'm going to leave this one at 2,500. I'm just going to begin adding a little texture that way. Maybe I'll grab another brush here, just add some texture. So you can see there's before, there's after. We're just building in the texture. I'm going to right click. I'm not really digging how these have that hard edge, but they are giving us just beautiful texture. I'm going to go ahead and choose load brushes, and I'm going to load my other watercolor brush pack, the MC Bad watercolor brush pack. And you can see how these are a little bit more maybe natural looking, but they are a lot smaller. So I'll just choose the first one here, and I'll just see what it looks like. You can see it doesn't look like it's doing too much, so we probably have to click several times when we're working with that. And there you go. Now you can see we've just sort of lightly added a shape there. And I think to change things up and mix things up, we're going to come up here to our brush options panel. Just click on that to open it up, and it's off screen here. Let me just drag it on screen. There we go. I'm going to tick on shape dynamics. I'm going to change size jitter just to maybe like 40, just to randomly change the size of the brush. And then also angle jitter. I'll change that to like about 20%, just so it's really going to mix things up for us. And then I'm going to bring the exposure here up to like 75%. So I can just click there to darken. I can click there to darken. I can click over here to add some texture. Click there to add a little texture. Click there, there, and I can just move around, and this brush is always going to look a little different. Then I can right-click. Well, actually, let me go back to the brush options panel, go back to brush tip shape, and choose a new brush tip shape from here. That way it'll keep my shape dynamics in place the way I have them set. That's cool, and I can just begin painting around. Let me just close my brush options panel here. I can begin painting around to build texture this way, right? So it's all about just building up texture, messing around with it a little bit. And if you don't want to burn, but instead you want to dodge, hold down your Alt or Option key and just click a few times. You can see how then we just add kind of some lighter textures to some areas. So that's pretty cool. You can just go through and add some texture that way and really begin to mix things up. Let me open up my brushes panel once more. Let me go for this huge brush. I'm going to lighten up to add texture there, and then I'll darken to add texture there. Let me grab, let's go with like this little brush here. I'm going to make this brush bigger. I'm going to stretch this one out to like 1,000% or 1,000 pixels, excuse me. And we're just going to make it much bigger than it's supposed to be. But we're just going to go in and begin adding, add texture. And you can see how we're just building up this texture, right? So if we shut this off, there's with no texture, there it is with texture. In fact, to really, let's say this is the texture we like, and we're not going to spend too much time. You could really spend all day working on this if you wanted. But let's say we love this texture, it looks cool. We can duplicate this layer, Command or Control J, to really increase the texture level. And you can see how that's really ramped things up for us. But let's go ahead and reduce the opacity of this duplicated watercolor texture layer because it's just a bit much at this point. I think that's a little bit better. And let's go ahead and add a brightness contrast layer. And I'm going to increase the brightness a little bit, maybe bump it up to like 50 or so. And let's reduce the contrast here by like negative 25-ish. So that looks pretty good. You can see there's before, there's after. We're kind of clearing things up a little. Let's add a vibrance adjustment layer here, and let's just push the vibrance way up. We really want to blow the colors here out of the water. So, 80 to 100 in the vibrance department looks pretty good. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and add a color balance adjustment layer. I'm going to begin with the shadows. I'm going to push a little bit more blue into the shadows, push a little bit more magenta into the shadows as well. And then maybe, we'll push more cyan into the shadows since the shadows are predominantly blue. Let's go to the midtones here. Let's see what looks better if we add yellow or blue overall. I think adding a little blue overall looks cool. Adding a little green overall looks pretty cool. And then adding some cyan to the midtones overall looks cool. And then here in the highlights, we'll throw a little bit more. Ooh, what do we want to do? Yeah, probably just a very little bit of green, a little bit of yellow, and then a little bit of red. Well, about plus 15 in the red department. So there's before color balance, there's after. We're just increasing the contrast, boosting the colors a little bit. Let's add a selective color adjustment layer as well. That's that little triangular looking icon there. And I just want to lift some of the darkest areas of this texture. So I'm going to come down here to the blacks, and I'm going to reduce the amount of blacks in the blackest parts of the image, which is really this bit over here. It's just going to lift that a little bit. You can see there's before, there's after. It's just going to help flatten our texture out a little bit. In fact, if some areas are too light, go up to whites and increase the amount of blacks in the white areas. And you can see it's just going to help darken and kind of suck some of the contrast and snappiness out of the very whitest parts of our texture, just to kind of reel it back in. We want this to be more of a subtle, sublime type of beauty here for this watercolor texture. Now let's go and open up our vintage concrete file. So I'm going to jump out to my Finder, and there's the vintage concrete. I'm just going to right click on this, and I'm going to choose to open it in Photoshop. Let's desaturate this by going Image Adjustments, Desaturate. And we're going to open up levels. So we're going to go Image Adjustments, Levels, because we want to try to kind of make the mid-tones, all those like lighter gray areas, we want to make them as close to 50% gray as possible so we can easily knock them out later by just setting this layer to like overlay or soft light, kind of like we just did with our watercolor texture. So I'm going to grab this center gray point and try to drag it to like the very middle of the histogram, right? And then I'm going to drag the black point over until I can see some good texture, set that middle gray point back to somewhere around the middle of that histogram. If I want to boost more whites in there, I can do that, but then just reorient that middle gray point again. And that looks about good, so I'll hit OK. And we're going to save this as a pattern by going Edit, Define Pattern, right there. And we're going to save this as Vint Concrete, something like that. Hit OK, and we can just close that file now. We don't even need to save it. Here we are back in this file, our watercolor file, and let's create a pattern layer. So we can do this by going Layer, New Fill Layer, and choose Pattern. And I'm going to say OK, and what we'll do is we will find our Vint Concrete. You can see here it is. This is the pattern that we just created. I'm going to scale this up a little bit. Maybe I'll scale it to like 165, and then with the pattern layer, you can just click and drag out here to move your pattern exactly where you want it to be. So I'm going to go with something just like that is fine. I'm going to set this layer to the blend mode of soft light. You're going to see the majority of it's going to drop away. We're just going to retain some of that crunchy, nice detail. That's good. And I'm going to reduce the opacity here to about 70% or so. Now let's duplicate this pattern layer by hitting Command or Control J, and I'm going to double click on it to open it back up. I'm going to set the scale here to 100%, and I'm just going to click and drag it just to randomize it a little bit more so it's not, kind of at all lined up with the pattern that we have set to 165% scaling right there. And if you need to, you can reduce the opacity a little bit more or boost the opacity depending on what you think your texture needs. But I think this is kind of a nice looking watercolor texture here that we've created. Just created it from scratch, and we got a totally randomized bunch of color thanks to a really colorful stock photo that we found. So let's merge all these layers to a new layer so we can take this texture and use it in our color explosion effect. We're going to use the hidden hotkey Command-Shift-Option or Control-Shift-Alt and the letter E, and there is our watercolor layer. So let's just name that watercolor, and let's create another new document, File, New, and we're going to set it to the same size, 2560 by 1440, as you see right there. Go ahead and hit Create. And here's where you take that YouTube play button that you downloaded. I have it right here, YouTubeIcon.svg, and just drag it and drop it right into your document like that. Hold down Shift and Alt or Shift and Option if you're on the Mac, and just scale the play button down until it's kind of in the middle of your document, just like that. Now, the first thing we want to do is just knock a hole right in the middle of the play button. I don't really care about seeing the shadow. If you want to preserve the shadow, you could cut it out and move it up to a new layer and layer it on top of everything. I'm going to grab the polygonal lasso tool right here. And what we'll do is we'll click right here in the top corner, hold down Shift, move our mouse all the way down, and just, kind of roughly trace this triangle in the center of our YouTube play button. And then we'll go Layer, Layer Mask, Hide Selection. So it's going to knock a hole right in the middle of our play button. You can see we have a black triangle in the middle of our layer mask, punching a hole right through the play button. So now we just have that play button shape. I'm going to actually click on that play button shape here in my Layers panel. And let's go ahead and drag our watercolor texture over. So we have the watercolor texture. Grab your move tool, click and drag, hold it on the tab, drop it in the Photoshop document. What we'll do is we'll make this a little bit bigger than our Photoshop document. So we'll go Edit, Free Transform. And I'm just going to hold down Shift and my Alt or Option keys and just scale it up a little bit. Something like that's probably fine. I'm going to commit the change there. And now let's duplicate this watercolor layer by hitting Command or Control J. Just shut that watercolor layer off, and let's select this watercolor layer that is still visible. And we're going to clip it to the layer beneath using the hotkey Command, Option, or Control Alt and the letter G. You can see how now the YouTube button assumes just that color. And this watercolor is a little bit too big. I want to size this down. We just sized it up for our duplicated watercolor. So with the clipped watercolor, we're once more going to go edit free transform. And I'm just going to size this down. I'm just going to hold down my Alt, my Shift and Alt key. That's Shift and Option on the Mac. And I'll size it down to something right around there. It doesn't need to exactly fit the YouTube play button, but you just want it to be a little bit smaller so we can pack more of that detail and texture in there. And now we can turn our bigger watercolor layer back on, and we want to add a filled layer mask. So hold down your Alt or Option key and click on the new layer mask icon down here at the bottom of the layers panel. Hold down Alt or Option and click on that. It's going to give you a filled black mask, which is going to hide all that watercolor stuff. Now we're going to grab our brush tool and we'll right click, and here's where we're going to replace these watercolor brushes by hitting that little cogwheel and going replace brushes. And we're going to begin choosing any of the brushes we want. I think I'm going to go with the dust brushes. Actually, I'm going to go with the powder brushes first. So I'm going to go powder brushes. I'm going to hit open. And here we are in Photoshop. We've got these big powder brushes. I can just select any one of them. I'll just go with any old one. But I'm going to open up my brush panel once more because we're going to tick on shape dynamics. We're going to change size jitter a lot, like 80+%. And we're going to change angle jitter a lot as well. Again, up 60 to 80%. Just so every time we click with this and we reveal some of this watercolor stuff, it's going to change the brush automatically. Now, I'm going to right click once more because 2500 pixels, it's just too big. I'm going to do like 1200 pixels because remember, this is going to get bigger and smaller. So if I start clicking, I'm painting with my foreground color here set to white, and we're painting up on the black mask here. So we're going to begin revealing little bits and sprays of the bigger watercolor shape that we created. Look, see how big the brush got right there? That one might be a little bit too big. And if the brush is too big, you can just click way out here and Photoshop will re-choose, reselect, resample the brush for you. Something like that. Cool, like that. And notice here we're filling in the play button in the middle. Don't worry about that. We'll get to that in a minute. So just begin creating, dustiness that would be coming off of the play button in whatever way. Maybe I'll primarily have it exploding out of the bottom right corner and the top left corner. Something like that's probably cool. We'll just click a few more times. There we go. Something like that is probably good for our initial base dusty explosion. Hey, want to take a quick break? If you're on Instagram, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. My handle is @tutvid. It's one of the best ways to share your work with me. If you create something using this tutorial, make sure you tag me, hit me up with the DM, tag me in your story, whatever it is. I really try to keep up with everything over there and distribute the likes and comments. And, it's the best way to have a little conversation. So if you're on Instagram, link up with me on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram @tutvid, @tutvid. Let's get back to the tutorial. And before we change brushes, I'm going to right-click here. I'm going to set the size of this brush to, I don't know, I'll knock it down a few hundred, maybe to like 900. And I'm going to come over here and select the YouTube buttons mask, right, that. And I'm going to set my foreground color here to black. So just hit that little swappy swap arrow. You're going to set your foreground color to black and just start painting just a few clicks. I'm not even using the Wacom tablet or anything here, just my mouse and just a few clicks around the edge to begin breaking up the edge of the YouTube play button. It's going to help kind of naturally mesh these shapes together. Right? You can see how that's looking for us. All right, now we will right-click and we will go and choose to replace these brushes. And I think I'm going to go with either the explosion brushes, maybe the disintegration brushes here I'll go with. You can see we've got these cool disintegration patterns. So I'm just going to choose any one of these. Again, we're going to make sure we open up our brush panel, tick on Shape Dynamics, bam, increase the size and the angle jitter, something like so. I can close that brush panel. We'll right-click once more. We'll size this down. We'll go right to like 800. This will be a little bit smaller. And we want to go up to our watercolor mask up on top here. We're going to work with this one first. So we need to be painting not with black, but with white. So let's hit the swappy swap arrows. And let's now begin creating some of this, bigger bits of particle explosion that will be coming off of the YouTube play button. All right, so something like that. That's probably cool. You don't want to go too crazy with any one brush. Doing too much is going to look pretty bad. So we want to just, be careful and be cognizant of what we're doing here. All right, let's go back down to the YouTube play buttons mask. Let's swap our foreground background color. So we're painting with black now. And now we'll just paint away some of the edges of the YouTube play button just so it looks like, they're actually bits of the YouTube play button that are exploding away and actually disappearing. That's pretty cool. All right, that's good for that brush. Maybe I'll just take away a little bit on the top there, just a little bit more. There we go, something like that. I'm just looking to break up. There's that really hard edge up there. I'm just looking to break that up a little bit more. All right, I'm going to right-click. We're going to go and replace the brushes once more. So I'm going to go replace brushes. I'm going to look at these explosion brushes. And I'm not sure I have the download link for these, but I think I kind of like these. So if you look up, search on Brush Easy, where you're going to get the rest of your downloads for this explosion brush. Let's set the size here to like 1250, and I'm going to open up my brush panel. We're going to tick on Shape Dynamics as we have been. Increase that size jitter, increase the angle jitter, and just look at where the explosion is coming from. See how there's a flat edge to it? Obviously, we're going to want the flat edge to be overlapping the YouTube button. So, whoop, I'm painting on the wrong mask with the wrong color. Let's go up here to our watercolor mask first. Let's make sure our foreground color is set to white, and we will go ahead and begin painting in these big sort of particle explosions. Yeah, this is a really cool brush. This one's going to be useful for us. Go ahead and paint that in there. Paint the explosion happening out there. Paint more explosion happening there. I don't know that I can use the brush on that angle. Let me just click out here once, click out here once. I want one that's going to be heading kind of up and away like that. There we go, something like that. And I could go into my brush panel, of course, and just if I show you here, I can bring up the brush panel. I can go to brush tip shape, and I can just straight up change the angle of the brush like this. If I want, just like that, I can say, yeah, I need to get one more click here out of the top corner. I need to have one more bit of explosion happening up there. That's cool. All right, let's come down here to the YouTube icon, and we're going to set our foreground color to black using those swappity swap arrows, and we're just going to begin painting now into the YouTube play button. I don't want that flat edge in my YouTube play button like that, so I want to make sure I'm painting into the YouTube play button, wiping away chunks of the YouTube play button by just painting black and painting bits and pieces of it away. Cool. So something like that's probably good. Let's go back up to the watercolor, and we're going to open up one more brush pack here. So we're going to choose to replace the brushes. Let's go with the dust brushes, see what these look like. And these look pretty cool. These are huge, so we'll probably only do 1 or 2 clicks with these, but I'm actually going to set these at about 2200. We're going to use these as big brushes. Open up the brush panel. We'll go Shape Dynamics. Size jitter the living daylights out of this, and also angle jitter this like crazy. We're going to go up to our watercolor mask up here. Make sure we're painting with white. Set the foreground color down here to white. Great. And I'm just going to click once, click twice, click 3 times. Oop, over there, that's a little bit too big. There we go. That's cool. That's cool. That's cool. All right, so something like that. We're just adding some of these like almost bokeh dust-looking particles, and then we'll select the YouTube icon. We'll set our foreground color here to black. I just hit the letter X to flip them. You can still use the swappity swap arrows, nothing against that. And then we'll just click a few times just to add a little bit more texture to the YouTube play button, kind of something like that. That looks pretty cool. Now, in order to maintain the definition of the YouTube play button, we really want to get that triangle again and mask away all the dust that's covering up the middle of the YouTube play button. So we're going to do that here by just hiding our top watercolor layer. And let's zoom in. And by the way, look at all the damage we've done to the YouTube play button just courtesy of this mask, right? If I shift click the mask, there it is with none of that disintegration stuff painted onto it, but that's what it looks like. All right, so I'm going to trace this center triangle once more. I probably should have saved the selection before. Hold down Shift and just move down. It does not at all have to be exact. It just has to kind of be close enough. There we go, something like that. Now that we have that selection, we'll turn our watercolor layer, we'll turn it back on, and I'm going to select the mask for the watercolor layer, and I'm just going to fill this with black. So my foreground color is set to black. I can just go Edit, I can go Fill, and I can just say, hey, go ahead and use my foreground color, hit OK, and then go Select, Deselect, and you can see we still have that nice crisp edged play button triangle in the middle of our play button. Now, one thing that I am noticing is it looks like over here, this straight up and down line in our texture is really distracting. It almost makes it look like that's the edge of the play button. So how can we break that up a little bit? Well, what we can do is we can go into our watercolor mask and now begin painting black to punch even more holes into this dustiness exploding out of the play button and just give more added realism. So let's grab our brush tool once more. Let's use the same dust brush here, but let's make the size a bit smaller. Let's knock it down to like 900, something like that. All right, you can see that. And I'm painting with black, and I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to paint a bunch of times and just really start breaking up that texture. I'll do the same thing over here, really start breaking up that texture. Same thing over there and over there. And you can see how this just really starts breaking apart all the dustiness coming off of the YouTube play button and just, kind of help give it additional texture. But most importantly, don't build a false edge and conceal the fact that we have a YouTube play button going on. In fact, I'm not so sure I like the perfectly clean edges, so I'm going to flip my foreground and background color, paint with white once more, and just paint a little bit little bit of texture that'll kind of be running out over that play button area, kind of something a little bit like that. So now one of the cool things you can do at this point, once you spend as much time as you want building the effect, you can go ahead and add a hue saturation adjustment layer. You can say, you know what, the hue isn't quite perfect. You can just swing the hue this way or that way to change the color of your overall effect. Like there, I can go with, maybe I want something that's more purple and blue, and I can, boom, get it like that. Or maybe I want something that's more sort of whatever's going on there, and I can increase the saturation or decrease the saturation. You can do anything you want. I kind of like the way it is. I'm going to delete the hue saturation adjustment layer. But another really cool thing you can do is apply a gradient map adjustment layer. If you click on the gradient stripe, you bring up your gradient editor, and you can create any number of just very vibrant colored gradients. Like let's go with like this kind of flat, dark blue to a very saturated green. You can see we get this cool effect. We can go like a very dark pink to a very hot pink, or maybe like it's not really pink, it's just a very, heavy color. And if you drag that color stop over, we increase the weight, if you will, of the dusty explosion. We go with like this red to like plum color, and I increase the plum color a little bit, drag it over. You can see the effect we get pretty cool. I can go with more of like a really dark purpley color over like a YouTube red. That's really kind of cool looking. We could hit OK, and we could collapse that, and maybe that's our final effect, or maybe we don't really like that at all. We want to delete that. The point is, you have a whole lot of options, and you can really take this effect and do whatever you want with it. So guys, that's really it. Now, if you do create this, make sure you upload your design to Instagram. If you're on Instagram and you do that thing, tag me in the image. Actually, like tag me in the image. That way I can make sure I see your artwork. If you just tag me, like, try to give me a shout out, within a couple hours, all those notifications, they just kind of go by and I miss stuff. But if you tag me in the image, it goes to my tagged images, and I can go and I can see what you made. So if you do make this, I would love it if you would upload it to Instagram, tag me in your image. You don't have to give me some elaborate shout out. I would just love to see it. I'll give you a like. I'll comment on it. And it would be great to see what kind of colors and concepts and logos and designs you come up with using this cool design created in Photoshop and a whole bunch of brushes. So if we're learning how to manipulate brushes in the brush panel, play with colors, build your own custom watercolor texture, and so much more in this video tutorial for now and forever, that's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one. And before you go, make sure you subscribe to my channel for more great tutorials every day. Also, buy my course. It helps us do what we do, and this channel is supported by viewers just like you. You can also just click the thumbnail and watch another video from this channel. See you next time, guys.